The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
I mean, at the heart of what blessedness is, what it means to be blessed, is to enjoy what God has intended for us all along, which is this intimate relationship with Him in an environment in which nothing will ever harm us again, and all of our needs are met, and our joy and satisfaction is so far beyond what we experience now.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Nancy Guthrie is a Bible teacher and speaker and the author of 20-something books. Her most recent book is Blessed, Experiencing the Promises of the Book of Revelation. Yes, that Book of Revelation. Nancy Guthrie, I'm so glad to have you on the Habit Podcast again.
I know. Thanks for having me back. Maybe I didn't make you mad or bore you to death the last time. So you said
No. We had lots of fun last time, and so I have every confidence that it's going to be a rip-roaring time again. So
well, I'm glad to get
your
to
new
talk
book, Blessed. Yeah. Do you say blessed or blessed?
I say blessed. I guess maybe when it's at the end of the sentence, maybe I'll say blessed. I don't know.
Blessed, experiencing the promise of the Book of Revelation. What possessed you to write about the Book of Revelation?
I know, crazy town, right?
You decide you're gonna settle all the controversies about this book once and for all. Is that the
hardly
idea?
that. No. Here's what it's based on. A couple of things. First of all, I believe in I'll use a big word, perspicuity of Scripture. That Scripture is clear and understandable. But I also think that so many of us have avoided the book of Revelation because we're afraid we can't understand it. Mm-hmm. And we're afraid of some of the controversy of it. And we're afraid of some of the blood and wrath and persecution in it. But I think the main thing is we think this is so controversial. I can't understand this. And maybe I don't really need to. Mm-hmm. And here is this book. And as you can tell by my title, I focus on this book's, the promise in this book, which is there are 7 times in the book of Revelation, there is a blessed are those statement. So it's got its own set of Beatitudes, kind of like the Sermon on the Mount has a set of Beatitudes. So here's a book that promises us blessing. And Jonathan, is there ever any promise of blessing from God that we would look at and we would want to say, you know what, I'm not really interested in that. I don't really need that. But here's this book that opens with the promise that blessed are those who read this book, those who hear and keep what is written in it. And I just looked at that and I just thought, well, I want that blessing. And I think maybe a lot of people might also want that blessing. So,
yeah. Now, I have an Instagram account, so I feel like I know the answer to this question. But what do you mean by blessed?
Maybe Instagram is not going to be your best source of hashtag blessed, right? Do you want a short answer or a long answer?
Maybe we'll start with a short and we'll see how it goes.
Okay. Yeah. So rather than going with what Instagram tells us means blessed, I propose we go with what the Bible presents to us in terms of what it means to be blessed. And, at the very beginning of the Bible is a picture of an environment in which God created this land in which he intended to inhabit with his people. And we could say from Genesis 1 and 2, it was an atmosphere of blessedness, of blessing. But all of that changes in Genesis chapter 3, when this curse comes upon the serpent and on the ground, and it impacts Adam and Eve. And so for most of the Bible, especially the Old Testament, there is this search for what's going to be done about the curse in this world so that we can enjoy the blessedness that God intended for us all along. And when we get to the New Testament, we see how this curse is going to be dealt with, especially when we get to the book of Revelation. We read that Christ became a curse for us, that the curse of sin was laid upon him so that we can enjoy the blessing of Abraham. Because way back there, this promise was made to Abraham, I'm going to bless you, and I'm going to bless those who bless you. And through you, all the families of the earth are going to be blessed. So Christ comes. He takes the curse upon himself so that we can enjoy that blessedness promised to Abraham. And you and I find ourselves now in this in-between time, this in-between the cross, the death, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus Christ, when on the cross, Jesus took that curse upon himself so that we could enjoy that blessedness God intended for us. But we're waiting for this day to come when we will enter into the blessedness that he has always intended, a blessedness that's glorious and unending, a blessedness of perfect security, perfect satisfaction, perfect joy, face-to-face relationship with him. I mean, at the heart of what blessedness is, what it means to be blessed, is to enjoy what God has intended for us all along, which is this intimate relationship with him in an environment in which nothing will ever harm us again, and all of our needs are met, and our joy and satisfaction is so far beyond what we experience now.
Yeah. Okay. So as you said, we live in this in-between time.
Yeah.
Where the blessedness has begun, but it's not complete. As you know, Nancy, this is a podcast about writing and the creative process. You write a lot. You do a lot of creative work. This notion of blessedness, and specifically the notion of sort of being in the now and the not yet, how does that shape the way you think about your work as a writer and as a teacher?
I'm not sure if I've ever really thought about that. I think I'm speaking to people who can feel very disoriented about that now and not yet, and confused about it, because, we read in the Bible these promises that are made to us, Old Testament and New Testament, about what God promised he's going to do in us and through us and for us. And yet we look around at our reality right now, and it doesn't seem to measure up. And I think that can generate doubt about those promises of God. A sense of, man, I must be doing this wrong. Yeah. If God has promised me this kind of blessedness and joy and satisfaction, and I look at my life and it isn't marked by those things, wow, either those promises aren't true, this is all a mirage, this promise, or maybe I'm not doing this right.
Yeah.
So what we really need instead is this deeper understanding of what I'm going to call a timeline of redemptive history of where we are right now, understanding, yes, all that is necessary for us to experience all of those promises in full, was accomplished in the life, death, resurrection of Jesus. But we are in this in-between time. And yet, as we look into the future and to all that God is going to provide for us, when Jesus returns and ushers us into this new creation, we actually don't have to wait for all of it. It's not totally future. We are experiencing some of this blessedness now, tastes and glimpses of it in the here and now. It's beginning in the interior of our lives, as where we were people who were dead. Yeah. And as we take hold of Christ, that new creation work is happening in the interior of our lives. So it begins now. But I suppose my task as a writer is to provide clarity about what God has promised. Yeah. And to instill hope and anticipation of all these promised in the future, and encourage a willingness to wait, a willingness to wait for all that God has promised. Yeah.
Yeah. You used the word disoriented or disorientation a minute ago. And I mean, when I think about your work, your body of work, it feels like there's a lot of orientation going on there. Just, I'm disoriented, and, orientation just means showing, pointing somebody to the east, like giving you an idea of what's, kind of which way we're facing. And not that we could just as easily say pointing somebody to the north, but as long as you know which direction you're facing, you can sort of get an idea of where you are. And that seems to be a pretty important part of what you're doing, and is what all of us as writers are doing, saying this is the story you're actually living in. It feels like you're living in this other story. Consider the possibility that maybe you're living in this story instead, and maybe orient yourself to this story.
And we need that reorientation, don't we? Because you and I, we're limited by our humanity. We can only see what's right around us, what's right in front of us, what we're watching on the news, and what we're experiencing in our own life. So we have a limited vantage point. And this is why we need revelation. And I'll use that term in the general sense, why we need God to reveal to us something outside of ourselves, something outside of our purview and our experience. We need revelation from God. But I'll also say it's why we need the book of Revelation, because that's what the book of Revelation is all about. It's giving us a view into spiritual realities that you and I can't see with the human eye. But there's things we need to see to be oriented for living our lives in this world in which we're still impacted by the curse, and there's evil is still with us. Satan is, a roaring lion seeking to devour us. The book of Revelation wants to give us eyes to see some things that we need to see to make our way in the realities of this world as we wait for the new creation. Yeah.
As you point out in your book, the word apocalypse just means an unveiling, a revealing of things that have been hidden. And you may or may not be interested in this topic, and if we can move on if it's not. But I'm curious. I was thinking, I was trying to make sense of, again, as writers, as people do creative work, the idea of uncovering that which has been hidden, is relevant to the work of the writer. I don't want to be sacrilegious, right? by saying we're all in the business of apocalypse. I mean, is that assess that idea?
Yeah. might be stretching it if we're going to use
Right.
if we're going to use it in the biblical sense, because there's a difference between coming to an epiphany and experiencing or receiving an apocalypse.
Okay.
So you and I, like, we might, now I'm seeing something.
Mm-hmm.
I've come to an epiphany, right? Like, I didn't see that before. I didn't recognize it before.
Mm-hmm.
That's generally human generated.
Okay.
But an apocalypse, if we're talking about in biblical terms, it's always something revealed by God. Revealed by God. When Jesus used that term in his ministry, like when Peter says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God," Jesus's response is, flesh and blood didn't apocalypse this to you.
Mm-hmm. Is that the verb that was used there?
Yeah, it's the same word.
Yeah.
Did reveal this to you, just like we read it as revelation in the book of Revelation. It wasn't flesh and blood that revealed or apocalypsed this to you. It's your Father in heaven. Mm-hmm. And so, I don't know. Can I push back and say maybe we're going to reserve the word?
No, that's fine.
Apocalypse, specifically in the biblical sense, to something that God does. This is a supernatural revelation. Now, I do think the work that I do, I certainly hope has some of that quality. Yeah. I mean, why bother if I'm just, if it's just words? Uh-huh. I actually have something to communicate in what I write about as I write about the scriptures. I'm wanting to take what has been apocalypsed in the scriptures and I want to shine the light on it. I'm not going to go as far to say as I'm going to further apocalypse it, because I'm not sure God needs quite that much help from me. But I want to use whatever skill and opportunity I have to shine a light on it. And, the grid I used in this book comes from the 3rd verse, where it says, "Blessed are those who hear and keep what is written in this book." And so I want to help people hear it. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I think there's been a lot of teaching of the book of Revelation that hasn't helped people hear it. Mm-hmm. Instead, it has instilled fear and confusion. So I want to help people hear what he says. And by hearing what he says, I don't want to impose upon it my grid, my framework, my timeline. Mm-hmm. My job as a Bible teacher is to help people hear it. But then the promise of blessedness is for those who both hear and keep it. And so a book like Revelation, I think a lot of people come to it and they're just like, there's nothing practical here. This is all just weird, strange stuff. And yet, if the blessedness, the blessing is for those who keep it, I want to help people figure out, what is it going to look like for us to actually keep, or I would say to live in light of what has been apocalypsed or revealed in this book.
Yeah. It's about as practical as you can be, right? I mean, living a life that actually is meaningful and happy, and what does practicality mean if it doesn't lead to a life of meaning and joy and these kinds of things?
Yeah, if God is revealing some reality that we need to see to be able to live our lives in this in-between time, what's that going to look like?
Yeah.
When he pulls back the curtain and I get to see through the book of Revelation, the worship going on in heaven, or I get to see the evil powers at work underneath what might seem like very ordinary things, like political powers or governmental powers or societal powers. That's going to have some impact on how I'm going to live, it's going to impact the media I consume and the voices I listen to and the opinions and attitudes that I take hold of and allow to shape me.
Yeah.
So I think those
That's
are very
practical.
practical things.
Yeah. I love what Chesterton said. That, pragmatism is a matter of, tending to human needs, but one of the first human needs is to be something more than a pragmatist. And so that was his criticism of pragmatism.
Mm-hmm. Well,
go ahead.
I would just say, I think maybe this gets at another reason people have avoided Revelation is that other books of the Bible, I think people tend to see as more practical.
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe they think it's going to be easier when you say in the epistles and you read all of these imperatives, do this and don't do this. That can appear to people to be actually more practical.
Yeah.
Apocalyptic literature, like we discover in Revelation, it's got a different way of communicating to us. But what it sets before us doesn't mean there's any less practical application.
Right.
So, yeah. So when it shows us the worship going on in heaven surrounding the throne, it's not telling us, here's how you worship.
Yeah.
But in a sense, it's showing us what pure, perfect worship looks like. And so therefore, in a practical sense, that causes us to go, does my worship look anything like that? Well, then maybe some adjustments need to be made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Can I return to something you said a little while ago? You said epiphany is human generated. What are you talking about? It seems to me epiphany is something that comes to me from outside.
Well, maybe I'm not using the words exactly correctly, so don't press me on this too much, Jonathan. But I think, in normal parlance, there is that sense in which I come to an epiphany. I have figured out something.
Okay.
But that apocalypse, there's a supernatural thing has happened so that something is uncovered, revealed. I could not see it. I could not come to this conclusion. I could not see this apart from a divine work that chooses to reveal it to me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. And we are, I get you. You're reluctant you pushed back on the idea of the writer's work as being apocalyptic insofar as it unveils. And I'm perfectly willing to reserve that word for its theological purposes.
Okay.
But I am interested in the idea that we are unveiling things that are hidden as sort of, just like talking about us being sub-creators, we're somehow sub-apocalypters.
Yeah.
But maybe we just sub-apocalypters. That's a pretty good word, but if we need to have another one, that's fine.
Well, I'm with you to the extent that, especially this book of Revelation, it's been covered up.
Yeah.
It's been covered up by the way it's been taught. It's been covered up by controversy. It's been covered up by people who say you can't understand it or fear. And so I'm all for being a sub-apocalypter for removing any barriers that hinder us from seeing into what God has apocalypsed in this book. How about that?
Okay. All right. Maybe we can agree and continue to be on friendly terms. Okay. As you have acknowledged, there's controversy around the book of Revelation. And yet in this book, and you specifically say in the introduction, you decided not to, make arguments against views that opposed yours. You did in this book, you don't come to, an image or a verse from the book of Revelation and say, now here are a lot of different ways of viewing this. And here's why I have chosen my view. You just kind of charge ahead with what you believe to be true about, any given passage or image. Tell me about that decision.
Yeah. And it remains to be seen how that goes with readers.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, I had a number of reasons for it. One reason is simply space. It takes a lot of space to review all the possible, even worthy, or what I might deem to even be unworthy, but but widely
influential, but unworthy.
Right. So it takes a lot of space. And, this book is already like 260 pages long, which is a lot. And so didn't have the space.
Okay.
Right? I didn't have the inclination.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Frankly. Number 3, if you got another view, then you write a book. And the truth is, the truth is a lot of people have. I mean, when I look at the landscape of teaching on the book of Revelation, it is so dominated by other views. Mm-hmm. So I feel like my challenge is actually, okay, I've got this audience that's been shaped by other views. Mm-hmm. And so my task is to make a solid case for what I think is a solid scriptural view. And so I took that as my task. I think this might be, though, my biggest reason. I'm thinking about my audience, and I'm thinking about a group that's going to get together to study Revelation. Mm-hmm. And let's say a group getting together to study Revelation in 2022. Yeah. And in our churches in 2022, I don't think this is going to be hard to convince anybody. There's so much to be divided about. There's so much that has divided us over the last 3 or 4 years, whether it's politics or masks or racial issues, whatever. And we don't want that when we come to study the Bible. And so I really didn't want to set groups up to spend their time talking about different views. Mm-hmm. I'm convinced that Revelation has a central message that's actually rather uncontroversial. It's not hard to understand. I think it's hard to live. Mm-hmm. I think it's challenging to submit to and obey, but it's not hard to understand. Most of the books on Revelation that I found, they started at this place of here's all of the basic interpretive views. And here are the different millennial positions. And honestly, kind of wears you out before you even get started. And, if you're coming to the scripture, you're already feeling a little intimidated about the very idea of studying Revelation. And then you get hit with that. You're just like, well, okay, so here's all these various teachers. And actually, I kind of respect some of them that hold different views. And so which one am I going to follow or which way am I going to go? And I guess bottom line, Jonathan, I just wanted to eliminate all of that. Mm-hmm. I wanted people to come to the book of Revelation and be encouraged that actually what rather than listen to all of these other voices about views of it, let's just go to the text and let's look for what is clear and compelling and can't be ignored. And so that was my approach. Whenever you have a book come out, you're thinking about, okay, so what are people going to say about it? What are the criticisms I'm going to get? And I'm sure that some of people's first criticism is that I didn't acknowledge a view, especially if it's their view. It's theirs, yeah. Mm-hmm. But I think I've provided a really sound resource that fills a gap that hasn't been there for lay people to study the book, the text of Revelation, and come to its central message, and then figure out how it's going to apply to their lives in this in-between time. That was my goal. And so I hope that I have accomplished that.
Have you gotten any negative reviews, by the way?
Well, maybe they just haven't spoken up loud enough.
Right.
I haven't searched out any.
You haven't gone to Amazon to see your bad reviews?
All of them are positive on Amazon, and all of them are positive on Goodreads. That I looked there those places the other day, but it's just been out a few weeks, so I'm sure the negative ones are to come, and they might not be on Amazon and other places. I have some ideas of where some of them might be, but honestly, at this point, I think people kind of know maybe what to expect from me, and so maybe they just won't bother. And like I said, there are plenty of other resources that will affirm their views, and so maybe they'll stick with those.
Yeah, right. You talk about the idea of, and we've touched on this a little bit already, knowing what story you're really living in, and that a big part of what's going on in the book of Revelation is saying, you think you're living in this story, and you're really living in this other story. And I do really like the way you invite the reader into a story, and specifically, one little moment I love in this book is when you invite the reader to imagine what it would be like to be a member of one of the 7 churches to which the book John's Apocalypse was addressed, and you say, you're kind of gathered in wherever that your church gathers, and you've it's not uncommon to have these people stand up and read these letters. You've heard letters from Paul and from Peter and from John. And then you get this wild letter, and you have to immediately, that member of the church at, I guess, is Ephesus one of the 7 churches? I can't remember.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Yes.
It is.
I shouldn't have doubted myself. Or Laodicea. And you get you have to quickly, if you're a person in that room, you have to quickly adjust your expectations. And I just loved the way you chose to invite us into that scene. And then, you go on to say, and then after you have heard this letter, you then walk home, and you're walking past all this Roman architecture and all these symbols of Roman power. And you have a whole new way of seeing that Roman power that you're living under. That's not a question. That's just a comment. I like what you're doing there.
Oh, good.
Would you like to say more about that? And your
Well, I think what I would say is one importance of that, is that for us to get to what the message of Revelation is for us today, there's someplace we have to go first. And we have to go first to what was the meaning of Revelation for its first audience. In fact, we have to do that in every book of the Bible.
Yeah.
But I think this key step is what's missing in so many, shall I say, unusual interpretations of Revelation, because they haven't stopped there first. Because, Jonathan, it cannot mean something radically different for us today than it meant for the first recipients of the letter.
Yeah.
And so it's very important. And I think it actually really serves us, because if we do see, so they realize, okay, they're hearing a very different kind of literature than they've heard in all of these other epistles that are giving all of these imperatives. They're being invited in to see these visions that John received. So these messages are coming in picture form.
Yeah.
And that they have a real purpose. These visions that John was given are given for the purpose that we would see reality on this earth through heaven's perspective. We get to see reality the way that God sees it. And so here are these people living in these 7 cities under the rule of Rome. Now, some of them likely see Rome as very beast-like, which later on in the book of Revelation, Rome, I think, will be presented, and it's more than just Rome for us over history, but it's for its original readers. Here's Rome, and how is it using its power? Many of them would see how it's using its power in very beastly ways as they're facing persecution and death. Other recipients of those letters, maybe they're not seeing Rome as so beastly, because actually they're enjoying all the perks of Rome. Yeah. And so the threat for them is very different. The threat for them is that they might compromise to be able to continue enjoying the benefits of being a Roman citizen and not reckon with the realities of being a citizen of a different kingdom with a different king. Yeah. And so, all of those recipients of the letter, they step out and they see the city that they're living in differently. I think that is the goal for the original recipients. And therefore, it helps us to think about that, to then take a step. So what does that mean for how I see the world that I live in and how I see governmental and political power and the voices that I listen to? Oh, if this beast of the sea is like a propaganda machine for the other beast, legitimating his power and his message, but really it's all coming from the dragon. It's all demonic messages and power. Well, maybe even though I'm not quick to look at things around me and see, some kind of big evil lurking underneath that, maybe I think, that's just kind of silly. That's kind of unsophisticated. Maybe I need to. Maybe I need to recognize that that there is a dragon who is still at work in our world, seeking to deceive us. Yeah.
Well, I love the way your attention to the envelope story shapes the way we see the story that's inside the envelope. And I love it when that happens with the epistles too, because the epistles seem so abstract and, like you can just sort of transport them wherever you want to, because it's just the rules, or the not rules, but what's the word you've been using for what the epistles do? The
imperatives that are in them.
Yeah. But it's always refreshing to me to hear the story into which those imperatives were first introduced, of how Corinth was different from Colossae and how that was different from Philippi. So, for the Ephesians, I'm now going to be self-indulgent, just telling an amusing anecdote. Is that okay, Nancy?
Sure, go for it.
We in our little morning Bible reading when my kids were little, we'd been reading about the Ephesians, about Ephesus, and the silversmiths, and the silversmiths getting mad at Paul. I guess it was Paul who got mad. Whoever the silversmiths got mad at and started a riot in Ephesus. And then a day or two later, I was headed to Memphis for something, and my little daughter, who was about 4 or 5 at the time, was just crying about me going to Memphis. And she had gotten Memphis and Ephesus mixed up and thought I was going to get mixed up with some rioting silversmiths when I went over to Memphis.
Oh, that's good.
That really was self-indulgent. But you know what?
I liked
Nancy,
it.
get your own podcast if you can tell your own stories. It's like you said about the Revelation, you have your own interpretation.
Was that kind of rude? I haven't said that out loud before to anybody. I've been thinking it a lot, but I haven't said it out loud.
No, I think that's a perfectly appropriate way to think about it. I'm called to write this. You go write something else. And that doesn't have to be ugly.
I didn't mean it ugly.
All right, Nancy, this might be a good place for us to wrap up. Thank you for your work as a Sub-Apocalypter. I really appreciate it.
Maybe I should make a sign, put it on my door that says
but hang a little shingle outside your place of business that says Nancy Guthrie, Sub-Apocalypter.
Sub-Apocalypter.
Well, thanks for being here.
Jonathan Rogers. Thank you for having me. And I love your podcast, and therefore I love my fellow listeners.
Great.
So
yes.
I'm glad to get to be in a conversation with you and with them.
Well, thanks for being here.
The Habit Podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. To check out more of our podcasts, visit rabbitroom.com/podcast. Our work at the Rabbit Room would be impossible without the generous support of our membership. If you'd like to learn more about membership at the Rabbit Room, visit rabbitroom.com/member. And thanks for listening.
The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.